Hello everyone, welcome back to Too Sweet MTG and welcome to another Cube Tuesdays. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about an awesome archetype that not enough people know about. Today, we're going to be talking about Red-Black Artifact Aggro. So this is an archetype that I've had in my cube for between 6 to 9 months now in some version or another. And recently, it's really come together and has really started popping off. I think the main reason why people haven't really heard about it or aren't really testing it yet is because a lot of the key cards aren't on Magic Online yet. The archetype got a ton of awesome cards from the Warhammer 40k decks, which aren't online yet. So it means this archetype is a bit of a sleeper, but by God, it's a good one. So what is this archetype trying to do? Well, as the name kind of suggests, it is an aggressive beatdown deck. A lot of the deck is made up from colorless spells. A lot of the spells are artifacts. But because you're also in red and also in black, you get access to a ton of really impactful and really awesome spells. And also really uniquely for an artifact deck, you get a lot of late game reach as well, so you can really push your damage through and win games that other aggressive decks just wouldn't stand a chance in. So because it's in Rakdos, you have access to burn spells in red. This is one of the easiest ways for some additional reach. If your creatures can't get through, you just point your burn spells directly at your opponent's life totals. But also in red, you get some really impactful artifact matters cards. You get things like Goblin Welder, which is by far one of the most improved Magic cards in the last 5 years. Goblin Welder pairs really nicely with some of the discard that you have in red, and also some of the reanimation effects in black. This artifact aggro deck loves running things like a reanimate or an entomb. You don't have to be cheating in to play a Grizzlebrand. A Chaos Defiler kills players just as quickly. Also in black, you get things like hand attack, which means that this deck can also compete in higher powered formats where combos are running around because you can like Thoughtseize or Inquisition or Duress cards out of their hand before they're an issue for you. So what you end up with is this hyper aggressive fast aggro deck that is really, really resilient and has a bunch of answers and is also capable of cheating in a massive creature on turn 2 or 3. Another fantastic thing about this deck is that so many of your pips are colorless. What that basically means is that it's easier to cast all your spells because a load of your 1, 2, and 3 drops are artifacts. It doesn't matter if you have a swamp, it doesn't matter if you have a mountain, you are going to be able to cast your spells on curve. What that basically means is that while this is a 2-color deck, you have the mana consistency of a monocolored deck while having the benefit of being able to take from 2 different colors worth of cards. An aggro deck loves curving out and beeping an opponent straight in the life total, and by God, this does it. So that's kind of like a high-level overview of what the archetype is trying to do. Let's go over some actual cards that you need to run in your cube if there's something you want to support. So the first thing to go over is the aggressive artifact creatures, and you really need a density of these in your cube. There are some truly awesome cards in this section. Something like Arcbound Ravager is really good and really annoying. Patrick Automaton is way better than it looks. It'll grow super quickly, get really big, and that Ward 2 means it's not going to die super early. You then have Steel Overseer, just grow your whole board super big. You then have Etched Champion, which becomes unblockable and really hard to deal with very quickly in this deck. You can block, you can put some equipment on it, it's just going to be great. You then have Nettlecyst, which just grows as the game goes on. You can equip it to your Etched Champion, we love it, it's all great. You then have Phyrexian Dragon Engine, a 3-mana 2/2 double strike is really strong on turn 3. It's going to be rumbling, it's going to be getting in for some damage, and then the fact it has Unearth means that you have some late game as well. It means they need at least 2 removal spells to get rid of this. And that additional card draw late game is honestly fantastic. Yes, you have to discard your hand, but you're an aggressive deck. You're probably not going to have a hand. You're just going to be returning this from the graveyard to draw 3 more cards. That is fantastic. And because that isn't entered the battlefield from the graveyard, not an Unearth trigger, it means that if you're Goblin Weldering it, if you're reanimating it, you will get that ability then as well. Honestly, that is really impactful. Phyrexian Dragon Engine is a true house of a card. And then lastly, for colorless cards I really like in this deck, we have Lodestone Golem. Probably about 75% of the spells in your deck are going to be artifacts. Lodestone Golem doesn't hurt you in the slightest. All of the spells that this will hit will be things like Lightning Bolt or Reanimate. They're cheap. By the time this is in play, we can just spend an extra mana to cast them. It is honestly scary how strong this card is in Cube. It effectively shuts off your opponents from double spelling for a large portion of the game. And that's if you're playing it on turn 4. In this deck, you can cast this on turn 2 or 3 very, very easily. At that point, you're putting your opponent back an obscene amount, while also being a 5/3 that can swing through and kill your opponents. If you can play this on turn 2, you've basically won that game of Magic. Okay, so those are some of the most important colorless artifacts that you can run to make this deck really sing. Let's move over to some of the spicier black cards that you can run, and first up is one of my favorites. It's Scorpeth Lord. It is 2 and a black for a 3/2 artifact creature Necron Noble with a menace, and other artifact creatures you control get +1/+0 and Menace, and also importantly, Unearth for 2 and a black. I cannot emphasize how awesome and strong this card is in a deck filled with artifact creatures. Giving all of them +1/+0 and Menace is obscene. I've generally won a lot of cube games with this card. That Unearth means that it's so annoying for your opponents to deal with. They have to throw 2 creatures or a removal spell to get rid of it in the first place while it's still pumping up your whole team. If you get this out with any kind of board state, you are going to be dealing so much damage to your opponents. But honestly, that Unearth is fantastic. It is a Lord effect that you get to use twice. And also, if you have an Entomb in your deck, you can tutor it. I won a very difficult game of Cube this weekend by entombing for this card, it pumping my team and giving the Menace, allowing me to swing through for a win. It is genuinely, honestly fantastic and one of the key cards for this strategy. We have 2 more Necrons in black to talk about. We have Necron Deathmark, which is a juiced up Ravenous Chupacabra, and Royal Warden, which just spits out a ton of Necron creatures. The Unearth on Royal Warden is also great, because effectively, this is 6 artifact bodies in 1 creature. You combine this with a Scorpeth Lord, and you're just going to kill your opponent. It's fantastic. Moving on to some red cards now. There's a ton of cards in red that this deck loves to run, but there's only a couple that specifically you should run to support this archetype. The first one is Goblin Welder. Honestly, this just does so much. Outside of the busted plays of like Faithless looting away a Wormcoil Engine, playing a Bauble with a Goblin Welder in play to swap him in, outside of like the stupid broken stuff, just the utility of this card in this deck is phenomenal. It just lets you keep buying back your best aggressive creatures that your opponent has either removed or they're trading off for. And if your opponent kills the Goblin Welder, well, they'll still have the rest of your board state to deal with. And never underestimate the ability that Goblin Welder can move your opponent's artifacts around as well. If they have a really good artifact in play and a really bad artifact in their graveyard, Goblin Welder works with them as well. It's really good. And then last in red, we have Scrapwork Mutt. This also does go into the more reanimaty side of this strategy and can go just into straight reanimator decks. But in this archetype, it's a good, fine body that gives us some cool card selection. And then again, the Unearth means that you can get its ability again. It's just great value for 2 mana. It's a really good card. There's 2 multicolored cards that I really like in this strategy. First up is Daretti Ingenious Iconoclast. If this Daretti is left unanswered, it just takes over so many games of Magic. What'll generally happen is you'll play it, uptick it to make an artifact, downtick it to kill a creature. But if your opponent isn't pressuring you, you can just keep upticking it and then ultimate it to make a bunch of really cool artifacts. But if your opponent is pressuring you with creatures, you can just keep on downticking it with some of your Signets or some of your Baubles and just machine gun down their best creatures turn after turn. And then of all the cards I'm recommending you run for this archetype, there is one that is a slam dunk, must have. You need to include this card in your cube. It is Chaos Defiler. This is a true House of a Magic card. 5 mana for a 5/4 trample that can remove anything. Because of the way it's worded, it gets around Hexproof and Shroud. It can kill a True Name Nemesis, anything like that. And it does it on the way in and on the way out. Even if you ignore everything I've said so far in this video, just run this card in your cube. It is phenomenal. It is generally one of the best red-black things that has been printed in the last couple of years. It's an awesomely stupid Magic card. So those kind of 10 to 15 cards are the ones that I think you really need to run in order to make this archetype work in your cube. If you're in a smaller cube like a 360, run 10 to 12 of those. If you're in a 540, run 15 of those. If you're above that, find some other cool artifact creatures and cram them in. But what's really nice about this archetype is there's probably so many other cards that you're already running or potentially could run that will go in this deck as well. Like if you're running Snowlands, a card like Icehide Golem is fantastic in both mono white aggro, mono red aggro, and also then obviously in Rakdos Artifact Aggro. Signal Pest is another fantastic card that other aggro decks want. It's great in this deck. Lizard Blaze is a great mono red card. It will just kill people. It goes in equipment decks and is an artifact, so it goes in this deck. Phyrexian Revoker is a really annoying creature that control decks and tempo decks really like. It's an artifact creature. We love it. Steel Overseer will put a counter on it. We love that. Porcelain Legionnaire is a staple in mono white decks. But why does it have to be white deck? Let's stick it in this Rakdos deck as well. You then have your X artifacts with Hangerback Walker and Walking Ballista. Put a load of mana into them, beat down with them, they'll be really, really good. You know, some of your bigger artifacts that a lot of cubes are going to be running, something like a Wormcoil Engine. Yes, this is an aggressive deck, but you have so many ways of making mana, specifically that cares about artifacts, you can get to 6 well ahead of curve. Or you can cheat it into play with the Goblin Welder Reanimate stuff we mentioned earlier. There's certain flex spots in my cube that I have tailored to work with some of the synergies that are in them. Things like aggressive white and aggressive red creatures you can really play about with to work with your other archetypes. Because for the aggro deck, they just want them to be aggressive. aggressive. But like with Lizard Blades, it's an artifact creature, so it goes in this deck as well. I've also done a little bit of that with my burns by specifically running Pyrite Spellbomb and Galvanic Blast. The Spellbomb has the upside in this deck that it's also an artifact, and the Galvanic Blast has the upside that it could be dealing 4 damage to any target instead of 2, effectively making it a better lightning bolt. That is very strong. I'm aware I've just rattled off a lot of cards at you. One thing with this archetype, it does tend to do better when there are naturally more artifacts just generally in your cube environment. So for example, in my cube where the Rakdos Aggro artifact deck has done really, really well, I also have artifacts in other colors. Like I have an Is It artifact deck that cares about going wide with artifacts. So in that one, you're going wide with things like construct tokens, you're playing a load of signets or talismans, whatever you have in your cube, you're playing baubles, things like that. Basically you're going wide with artifacts and then they reward you for having a large number of them. But there's other artifact decks you can have in a cube. You can have a dedicated cheat in to play artifact deck with things like Tinker or Trash for Treasure or Show and Tell, cheating in some big dumb artifacts. All of these archetypes just get better naturally just by there being more artifacts generally in the cube. Of all the different flavors of artifact decks, I do think the black-red artifact aggro one is the one that works best self-contained. The reason for that is because just the creatures will synergize with themselves nicely, and then you can top up your deck with like burn and other things. So everything I've mentioned up until now, I think will work really nicely in any power level of cube where basically it's not budget restrictive. Like Arcbound Ravager and Duretti are probably the most expensive cards I've gone through so far. If you're in a more budget environment, you can definitely cut those, run some other cards you think are cool and aggressive and artifacts, and then the deck will still work. You'll still have something function in a more budget environment. If you're in a higher power level environment, there are 2 cards you can add to really spice up this deck a little bit. Those 2 are Mishra's Workshop and Tolarian Academy. And now before anyone says anything, proxy-friendly cube environments are what I'm all about. And then obviously in things like the Vintage Cube, where you have the highest power level of cards, you're also going to have things like Moxen, which are artifacts which work really well in this strategy. Honestly, once the Warhammer cards are on Mitgo, I would be stunned and shocked if they don't make their way into the Mitgo Vintage Cube, and then people really realize how strong this archetype really is. I'm partly expecting an uptick in views on this video when LSV kills someone with a Scorpus Lord for the first time. When that happens, awesome. Thank you all very much for joining. Please like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. Because being completely honest, this deck has just been really, really strong and really, really consistent in the 9 months that we've had it in my cube. The first 3 months of that, we were still kind of working out how it looked like, but the last 6 months, it's probably been the single most winningest archetype that we've seen. The versions that have Tolarian Academy and Mishra's Workshop are kind of messed up. They're actually really, really terrifying. You can really run over opponents super, super quickly. But the more time it's been in my cube, the more people have adjusted to those cards being in it. Meaning it's not just a free roll for one artifact player. Now there's like 2 or 3 artifact players in my cube at any one time. It doesn't mean you're guaranteed to get the busted cards. But in the most recent draft of my cube, I took it down with the artifact aggro deck that didn't have Mishra's Workshop, it didn't have Tolarian Academy. But the other players in my cube had a load of their broken cards. I was still able to aggro and value and grind out wins with this deck. If you add this to your cube, I strongly think it'll be one of the stronger archetypes in there, no matter the power level of the thing. Okay, so we've gone over the key cards, we've gone over why I think it's good. Let's go over how you actually draft it. So one of the best ways to get into this archetype is basically if you're in a red or a black deck and you're already kind of leaning aggressive. Maybe you've taken a Ragavan, maybe you've taken a Lightning Bolt, something like that. That is a great way to start off in this archetype. But maybe you were in black, maybe you took some black removal spells first. They will still have a place in this deck, so you're all still good. Maybe you took some fast mana first, maybe you first picked something like an Ancient Tomb, or maybe you were just being safe and took some Signets or some Talismans early. You can even get into this deck from like a Reanimator style. Maybe you took an Entomb early, maybe you took a Reanimate early, but the rest of the pieces aren't really appearing. If you have any of those things I've kind of mentioned, and then you start seeing, maybe from like pick 5 onwards, some of the key aggressive artifact creatures, you're pretty safe that this strategy is open. I'm talking like the Arcbound Ravager, the Patchwork Automaton, the Steel Overseer, the Dragon Engine, those kind of cards. Like specifically the ones that cast for colorless. If you start seeing those cards, that's a good sign that the strategy is open. Towards the end of pack 1, you can then start taking some of these cards. And also you can start prioritizing other artifacts. Like things like equipment is very good. Like a Shadow Spear is phenomenal in this deck. Like the artifact density is super important. Like I generally think you want between maybe like 15 and 17 of your cards to be artifacts. That can also include lands. If you run any artifact lands in your cube or something like a Mishra's Factory that can become an artifact, we would count that, that's fine. But once you think you're in this strategy, just focusing slightly more on artifacts will really pay wonders for your deck. In packs 2 and 3, your early picks can be focused on just more good red and black cards. Like if I'm confident I'm the only one drafting this deck, I'm taking a Lightning Bolt before I take a Lodestone Golem, even though the Lodestone Golem is better for my deck. The Lightning Bolt will have more utility, and I'm more likely to wield a Lodestone Golem than I am something like the Lightning Bolt. And those picks where you're hoping to wield things, you can kind of tailor to what the cube environment that you're in is like. Like if it's a creature-based cube, then yeah, take your burn, take your creature removal spells. If it's a more combo cube, then prioritize things like Thoughtseize or like other kind of hand attack so you can have answers to what's in front of you. And what I said earlier, the pip density of this deck is way better, meaning you don't need to worry too much about lands. I would generally still want at least like one jewel and a couple of fetches just to make things a little bit smoother. I still like drafting lands, I still think it's good. The only cards I would take over absolutely anything else, and this might be me being a bit biased on this strategy, but one is Goblin Welder. I honestly think this card is super messed up nowadays. And also Chaos Defiler. Think of Chaos Defiler as what Craterhoof is to green decks, Chaos Defiler is to Artifact Aggro decks. And then obviously if your cube has like Tolarian Academy or Mishra's Workshop, you take those extremely highly if you see them in pack 2 or 3. I don't think it's worth taking a Mishra's Workshop super early in pack 1, if I'm honest with you, before you know this archetype is open, because it might just be a dead pick a lot of the time. But if you were forcing it, then yes, 100% take the Mishra's Workshop or the Tolarian Academy. And before anyone says anything, it doesn't matter that Tolarian Academy makes blue mana. We don't care about that at all. Effectively, it's colorless mana, which this deck is completely fine with. Right, I think we're going to bring an end to the video there. Do let me know down in the comments what you think about this archetype. Let me know if you've played with it before, or let me know if you're thinking of adding it to your own cube. I will put a link down to my cube in the description below. There are so many other cards that I haven't spoken about. There's so many other just like random artifact creatures or things that care about artifacts. They're just floating around, they're just good cards. The ones I've spoken about in detail in this video are the ones that I think are the absolute core. The ones that anyone can add to any cube to make this archetype work. I will take whatever reputation I have garnered on YouTube by saying finally in this video that I think this is one of the strongest archetypes out there, and just more people need to experience it and more people need to play with it. As I said, when it's finally added to the Mitgo Vintage Cube, I'm pretty confident I will be justified. But anyway, until next time, please like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff, and I'll see you all soon. Goodbye.